Thank you. And I have a co-presenter. Her name is Valerie Tim. Valerie.
I'm sorry, Valerie.
Valerie is our capital portfolio manager. And so Valerie and I work at establishing our capital equipment replacement processes, or at least the processes for designing long-term replacement. Okay. So Valerie, you have anything to add?
No, I think you covered it. Happy to be here with you all. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today about our process.
So a little bit about this. The overview is we've done the introductions. We're going to be talking about technology management strategy, technology assessment and prioritization criteria, how to implement in your organization, and then tips for pitching an equipment replacement plan. And then we'll have a Q&A session. Probably won't take the whole time, okay? But that time will allow you to ask more questions. So I'd like to go around and have each of you introduce yourself. There's only 5 people here right now, Valerie.
Okay,
I'm
perfect.
going to start in the back. Oh, you know Marlene Davis then, don't you? Oh, you don't know Marlene? No. Okay. She works in biomedical engineering, but she was a capital equipment planner for a long time. Oh, that's right. Because well, it's not Jim Stewart's group anymore. I can't remember who the director of it is. Yeah, Jesse.
My name is Rachel Casey, and the University of Texas Medical Branch, and I'm on the clinical ops side, so understanding how I can contribute to this process.
Okay.
My name is Keith Hall with Renova Solutions, the Director of Service for Imaging for the Western United States, and oversee, make sure there's a good support plan for all the medical imaging devices throughout the region.
Okay.
My name's Dan Scriber. I'm a service product manager for Can Medical Systems.
I've heard your name before, Dana.
Okay.
Yeah.
With folks for 18 years.
Yeah, that's what I thought, but I didn't want to say anything about Papa Phillips, okay? Uncle Philly. All right. Valerie, I'll let you start with this slide. Can you see
All right,
it?
perfect. Yes, I can see that now. I'm sorry, I didn't get to hear who all is in the room, but I'm really excited to be here today to kind of tell you a little bit more about what we're doing at St. Luke's. And I'll tell you a little bit more about my role as well. But first, to introduce you to St. Luke's Health System, we are the only Idaho-based, not-for-profit, community-owned and community-led health system in the state of Idaho. We have 8 medical centers, about 1,000 beds, over 300 clinics. We're the largest private employer in the state, next to the state of Idaho, at over 16,000 employees. And we have more than 2,000 providers that are in our network. We serve mainly the Treasure Valley and the Magic Valleys. We have different names for our areas in Idaho if you're not familiar with Idaho and how we're made up, but Treasure Valley is essentially Boise and the greater population around that that's been growing exponentially over the last couple of years. And then our Magic Valley is Twin Falls and our Wood River Sun Valley, where there's a lot of skiing, if you've ever been to visit us out there. And so that's basically the area that we're serving. We are a little bit in Eastern Oregon and as well as Northern Nevada. So we have a great responsibility to our community, and it's our mission to improve the health of the people that we serve here in Idaho. A little bit about, Dean, we can probably go to the next slide, my role in the organization and kind of what our break-fix technology management strategy is. I started out in our organization with project management and specifically within our supply chain capital sourcing department, just really working on our new construction projects and our medical equipment procurement. And through that process, found an opportunity to kind of strategically align ourselves a little bit better in our organization and how we approach our capital planning dollars. So I'll tell you a little bit about what our process looked like about 6 years ago and how we've been evolving it into what it is now, and with Dean and I working together more closely, specifically within our imaging areas. So if you have a capital process that you are participating in your organization, this might sound familiar to you, but we have an annual call for capital that is aligned with our fiscal year. So our fiscal year starts in October, and we'll start to do that probably August or September generally. And basically we'll ask all of the department directors or managers across our organization, that's those 300 clinics and our 8 medical centers, of what our needs are operationally and what are your top capital requests. We'll ask for that to be kind of self-prioritized, 1 through 3. And then depending on how much money is allocated and in what ways, you might get 1 or 2 of your top asks. And that's the way that we've approached it as an organization to make sure that every department is being invested in continuously, and we have that equity across our organization when it comes to capital. But the challenge with this approach that we have found is that, first of all, imaging equipment is a little bit more expensive. So if you have 2 MRIs and a CT and maybe a general X-ray that you need to replace, and you can only get one thing, that isn't adequate to meet the needs within imaging. And it also doesn't allow us to look at our capital planning more long-term and be more strategic. And so we don't have a lot of transparency into what the needs are with our financial planners in our organization and our teams for supply chain to negotiate those deals long-term if we're just going to buy 1 or 2 things a year for each department. And so what we tried to start doing was to look at opportunities to become more standardized and to see further into the future and looking at more of a 3 to 5 year roadmap for our imaging replacement plans. We know that if we wait to the point where an MRI or CT is broken and we can't bring it back up, that project just to get that back up and running and replaced with the lead time with your vendor and your selection, construction that needs to go on, could take 6 to 8 months, depending on where you are in that process, if your organization has set that funding aside. And so we really want to be moving away from a break-fix perspective so that we can start to be more proactive and predict what we're going to need and when, and not just for our financial reasons, but also so that we can start to look at standardization of equipment across the system and make decisions together across our health system with all of our leaders to look at the technology that's available and the benefits of that, and then allow our biomed technicians, our users of the equipment across the system to be able to go between our sites and work and know what that equipment is and how to use it. And there's a lot of benefits to being able to do that. And so that's sort of been our journey over the last couple of years, is changing our culture and our approach from 1 or 2 pieces of equipment to having a more robust and comprehensive plan for all of our imaging equipment. Dean, anything you'd like to add to that before we move on to kind of what our current state looks like, or any questions there?
Not much, because that was, the last part of that was just as I was coming into the organization. And so when I arrived, they hired me to do 2 things: lead the imaging team and service, and then assist Valerie with capital equipment replacement for imaging.
Yeah.
So go there. There you go, Valerie.
Yeah, perfect. We'll just jump into kind of after you got into the organization, really gave an opportunity to start to partner with Dean. And then I moved from supply chain, where I was negotiating and sourcing our imaging deals and the things that we would purchase, into moving into more of a strategic planning role in the organization to start planning out capital, not just within imaging, but within all of our technology, medical technology, with our facilities services as well. So that could be when are we going to replace the roof on the building, our chillers, our flooring, I mean, all of it for the health system. But imaging was really the place that we started out tackling this as an organization, because it is equipment that is more expensive and it's fixed to the wall, so there's, or the floor or the ceiling, and so there's always a construction component to a lot of the modalities that we need to replace, and it just takes a lot more time to do that. So we wanted to start within our imaging areas there, and then surgical services was kind of next for us, but this was really our sort of our test pilot for introducing this concept into the organization. So what we kind of start to do with is work with Dean and his team to understand our data, to understand what we have across all of our different facilities. We want to know, these are my favorite questions. What do we own? Where is it? And how old is it? It's a lot easier to answer the where is it question if it is fixed to a certain room and isn't on wheels. We found that through replacement planning for sure. But that really is the foundation that you need to start with when you are putting together a technology replacement plan, is knowing what we own and how old it is. And then once you have that foundation, that allows you to start working on your multi-year replacement roadmap. That's where you can start to become more proactive and more predictable. Replacing for capital, or planning for replacement for capital, really is an art and a science. We can anticipate something going down as much as we want, but there's always going to be a surprise of things that happen that we did not expect for. So really an art and a science and a balance there. Dean and I have implemented some tools that we'll show you here on the next couple of slides that help us kind of track our progress and track our plans to help with prioritization. We have prioritization criteria that we've introduced to the organization to kind of help us go through sort of what we call our technology or technical debt that we have. So there's always going to be a lot more needs, a lot more wants than what we're going to have funding available for. So that kind of helps us go through our prioritization process and decide what we're going to invest in and when. Right now, we've been kind of building everything out in spreadsheets to understand what kind of reporting is going to be useful for us. But we have some tools in our organization that we're going to start moving towards, where we can kind of have that data pulled for us in a more sophisticated way. And then we create a review cycle for all of the modalities that we're looking at, and we continuously refresh these replacement plans once they're established, so that we can make sure we're always up to date and staying with the latest technology that's out there. We're working with our end of support dates that change from time to time, and we've got a good solid plan year round. All right, on the next slide, this kind of breaks down for you what it looks like and how we kind of stay organized. So I call this the plan for the plan on the left side. That is just kind of grouping out and getting organized all of the different modalities that we wanted to look at, and we categorized those in a certain way. Dean and I had to kind of chunk this out and put it in different phases so that the work didn't feel as overwhelming and a little bit more manageable to get through. So we started this in 2022, and you can see we had a 2023 review cycle as well. We now have our 2024 that we're in, kind of going back and establishing these roadmaps. So we allowed for about 3 months to go through all of the data and really validate with our operating partners, what do we own, where is it, how old is it, and we want to make sure that that is a correct and solid foundation in our data cleanup. And you might find that in your organization as well, that we don't always have the purchase date if it's 15 years old and we didn't have records at the time or something had changed. And so there's always a little bit of a validation that you want to do when you're starting out. We'll then review it with our department leaders to make sure that that's correct, and then we'll start to kind of prioritize and confirm that priority for replacement within each of these modalities. And then once we kind of have that foundation, what my role is in the organization is to help kind of create those replacement plans and start to put together a justification for our executive approval. We can then bring finance in and our executive teams to endorse our recommendations and modify that or update our capital plan with our recommendations that we found in each of these areas. And then after we have an approved plan, we'll work with supply chain even further, and they will start that process of engaging our vendors, maybe going out for a request for proposal or RFP to look at our standards, to look at new technology that's out there, and then they can help with the selection process, the negotiations, and the installation for our replacement plans. And this really allows them to have a great strategic opportunity to help us get the best pricing for service, for the equipment itself, and really just be more strategic than if we were to approach it as a break fix and only bought something when it was broken and didn't look at the big picture or long term down the road. Dean, anything you'd add to that for our
Nope, I don't have anything.
planning?
Go to the next
All right,
slide.
perfect.
So
Yeah, I'll turn it over to you to talk through more of these details. Thanks.
So one of the things Valerie asked me to do is take a look at the technology that we have in depth. One of the things we, of course, identified was age, but along with age was, where are we with Windows? What level of software do we have from the vendor in the systems? And I expected to, because this group had always seemed to buy and group and bulk purchases some standardized applications. What I found was a little bit different. And you'll notice the color scheming, and unfortunately Valerie's picture's in the way here, and I'll get that out of the way here in a little bit. But when I look at aging groups, the one thing I learned when I worked for Philips was it's not necessarily the age of the equipment, but when the product actually came to market and your age of the equipment in that product market cycle. So I look at current devices as being within, the first 5 years of when it came out, and then I stage it out for aging like that. I look at, whether it's a matured status, which is really the sweet point of when that piece of equipment is going to operate to the declining status when it's getting ready to become in a product life by the OEM. In other words, they're not going to offer it for sale anymore. Or if they do, it's in a refurbished status, okay? Then we talk about obsolescence, and you quickly turn into sunset, and then depending on the vendor, who knows when they're going to EOS sell it, okay? It just really was a tool that enabled us to take a look at these and try and move these pieces of equipment into position for grading for replacement. So the second part of this, and I can't read it from here, and I'm not totally, was talking about the operating system, whether it's Windows based, the software rev. Are there any upgrades available for this particular piece of equipment? Okay, that's key. That's part of obsolescence management with the vendor, because if you miss one upgrade cycle, your product's going to be short-lived, okay? We looked at cybersecurity threats, and I worked with our cybersecurity team on some of this stuff to determine if it was remediable or not. Then I put it into a sunset technology status. Not necessarily in line with the vendor, but necessarily in line with what we wanted to see in our aging cycles so that we could grade the equipment. And of course, EOL dates and EOS dates from the vendor. What we did then is rank devices, and you can see we build out there, and the spreadsheet's cut off, but I think what we did was we looked to grade. And because the life cycles in imaging are so long, at 15 to 17 years, we went out with 10 to 15 year planning cycles with imaging. Okay. Valerie, you want to take this slide, please?
Yes, I will. So when we were looking at prioritization criteria, after we would look at the data that Dean just showed you on that slide, we wanted to look at a couple of different things. And first and foremost, clinical input and the utilization of the equipment is what we need to be looking at. So really making sure that we're connecting with our department leaders and the users of our devices to make sure that we have those priorities and what's kind of happening day to day on the ground.
Valerie, you need to hide your
picture.
window because you're blocking the slide.
Okay. Is that better?
Yep.
Perfect. We also wanted to supplement with utilization data, if that's available for your equipment, to then kind of sequence or narrow our replacement priorities if there was a large volume of equipment that needed to be replaced. So if you look at something like ultrasound across the system, which you probably have a lot more of, we may have 100 ultrasounds that are eligible for replacement in the same year, but we want to stagger that over a couple of years. So how can we look at utilization data or repairs and maintenance data to maybe make some of those prioritizations? And the other point there is that just because we bought it 10, 15 years ago doesn't mean that we necessarily need that in the future. Lots of things change, and so volumes will kind of help us with that. If we have something that's being underutilized or overutilized, maybe we need to replace it and add to, or relocate that equipment into a different area. And so if you have access to your utilization data, that is really helpful to inform your technology planning. It's not always replacement that is the strategy that you need to use, but maybe it's reallocating your equipment, and it'll lead you down that path. We also want to look at service and support. So again, it may not be that we have to go right to replacement. There may be other options out there that we could take a look at to extend the life of the technology. A lot of times it might feel like when you get an end of support date from a manufacturer and they tell you that December 31st of 2024, they will no longer provide service, it almost seems as if it might spontaneously combust, right, in some ways. And so we want to make sure that we're looking at all of the different options out there. If we can continue to support it in-house with like Dean's HTM team, then we might take advantage of that option. There might be other vendors out there in the market that can help support us. And so we just want to make sure that we've exhausted all of those and we understand what the landscape is for that modality before we just jump right into buying a new one. We'll look at assessment of the parts that are internally available and then out there in the market, and maybe we stock up on those proactively based on what we think we'll need. And that's where your HTM partner is really going to help pull that part of your strategy together. So end of support is definitely a date that we look at to kind of help us narrow in on what we should be focusing on, but it's not going to be this full driver for replacement. We kind of have to look at that whole picture. And then we kind of look at the financials and the risks. And so that's where a good financial partner can help build out a really comprehensive strategy as well, so that we can look at options for deferral, or maybe we're just spending a lot of resources, time, money on repairing a piece of equipment that isn't at end of support, but we're just having a lot of trouble with. And so they can help us kind of understand if we should continue to invest in that piece of equipment or if we should just buy new. I always relate that to having an old car that's been super reliable, but maybe needs a really big maintenance bill on it. And that's kind of your tipping point of, do I keep investing in this old car even though it's going to get me from point A to B? Or is this really the time to kind of make a new decision and buy the new model that maybe has better technology available and would be a better investment long term? So there is that analysis that you can do to see what is the best option for your organization. And that's also going to depend a lot on what else is out there of things that you're going to need to invest in.
All right. Now, some of you might recognize this part of our presentation. We got permission from Sodexo Menzing Wang because they used the cornerstone type of thing. We put our own input into the slide. So I want to give them a little bit of credit.
Absolutely. They've definitely been an inspiration and a great resource. Yeah, they've been a great resource to kind of help build it and tweak it to what we want it to be in our organization. and look at things a little differently. So I definitely recommend going out and taking advantage of that as well. And Dean and I could get you that information if you need it after the presentation. And then we look at the last piece is just the equipment condition and safety. And again, another connection with our HTM team and our clinical users. What does the condition of it look like? And how will we kind of look at the cybersecurity, any patient safety events that might play a factor in what we want to do for replacement. So that's kind of how we're approaching it when we have a high volume of equipment to replace.
So how to enrich your imaging technology strategy. And Valerie and I have discussed this for hours upon end. What we come up with was engaging health technology management partners. So if you have a strong HTM program, which is in some people's book, clinical engineering or biomedical engineering, right? Or with an ISO like Sodexo, Renovo, there's TriMedics and many, many others out there. Engaging those folks allows for you to be able to leverage technology knowledge, okay? Conduct a data validation of the current inventory. And one of the surprises that I got when I thought we had standardized software versions on systems that were supposedly in the close to same age group, we didn't. And it was timing at which they were purchased. So be careful with understanding how to do obsolescence management with that, because it will be dependent upon the software version. And what we found out with some of our older CTs when we signed service agreements for in-house support services and we tacked on obsolescence management to help extend the life, we found that 4 CTs were no longer available to be able to do so. That can impact your planning in the future. We had hoped to be able to make those CTs last another 6 or 7 years. We're probably not going to be in that realm to do that with those 4 CTs. Okay. Identify opportunities to extend your lifespans, establish replacement prioritization criteria, present findings to the operating and financial leadership, of course, and we're a capital committee structure for approval. With us, we build this plan. We work with a group called the Imaging Community of Practice. They are our imaging managers and leaders, and we discuss this information with them. They tell us where they want to concentrate on looking for new technology. So we're doing 2 things. We're worried about the budgetary process for the next 3 or 4 years, but we're also looking at the long term and trying to understand what technologies do we potentially want to leverage in 6 or 7 years, okay? And then creating a continuous revenue cycle, and Valerie has done a great job of working at that for the organization and building the roadmaps. Tips for replacement plans. Valerie, I'll let you have that one.
All right, sounds good. So there's a lot of opportunity to introduce this into your organization and in your line of work. So we wanted to leave you with some tips that we've kind of seen over the last couple of years that will be really helpful when you're taking a replacement plan to your leadership for approval. So really having that data-driven approach that gives your team the why behind the what. In our organization, with our senior executive leadership, they're responsible for a really broad range of our health system across all of our different sites and spaces of care. So they're not as involved in that day-to-day operations of understanding what it's like when you have to, kind of reorganize your day with your patients because a piece of equipment is down again and you really need it to be up. So being able to explain the why behind your approach and what you're asking for, and then having data to support that. How often is it down? What is the outlook for it for that end of support? What's going to happen if we don't replace it is a question I always like to answer in the proposals or executive summaries that we put forward, so that they understand if we don't invest in this, what our options are. And always being able to provide some choice in that is really helpful for leadership as well, to show that you've kind of done your homework and you have that good, better, best scenario. Demonstrating that there have been those alternatives that you've considered. You've exhausted all of the options for replacement or for third party to continue it, or for upgrading your equipment, especially if you're in a capital constrained environment, which many health systems are right now. We definitely want to spread the replacements, especially if it's a high volume, through a multi-year roadmap than requesting everything all in 1 year. You're going to be more successful if you can spread it out over 3 years or maybe 5 years even, and show that you're thinking down the road and you're being more strategic. And then, like I said before, kind of having different scenarios, so giving them your good, better, best kind of options, and being able to sort of negotiate what you'd be able to live with if your best case scenario isn't something that the organization can accommodate. And then there's also different funding approaches for your organization and the equipment type. So in our organization, we have a preference for capital purchases and owning our equipment. But there's lots of other options out there if that's not an option for your organization and you need to investigate that for a multi-year roadmap with different leases, rental options, placement agreements, things like that. And your finance leaders and your supply chain leaders can kind of help work through those options if you're not getting your needs met through a capital purchase. So that's what we would recommend when you're presenting that replacement plan after you've done all of that due diligence to put it together.